Just stand there and smile, Claire. You don't need to understand what we do. My husband didn't even look at me when he said it. He was adjusting his cufflinks. Gold. Subtle. Expensive in the way men like him prefer. Quiet signals of power. I nodded once. Not because I agreed, because I had learned timing matters more than reactions. The ballroom was already full. Soft golden lighting, crystal glasses, conversations that sounded effortless but were carefully calculated. The kind of room where everyone was important, or pretending to be. Daniel thrived in rooms like this. I used to. A server passed by. I took a glass of champagne. Didn't drink it, just held it. It gave my hands something to do. Stay close, Daniel added, finally glancing at me. But don't interrupt when I'm talking. I gave him a small smile, the kind people mistake for agreement. Then he was gone, pulled into a circle of men in tailored suits and practiced confidence. I stayed where I was. That was the role now. Visible, but not relevant. Daniel Whitmore is incredible, a woman near me said, her voice dipped in admiration. Everything he's built in just a few years? Her friend nodded. Self-made. That's rare at this level. Self-made. I let that sit in the air for a moment. Then I took a slow sip of champagne. It tasted dry, sharp, honest. Across the room, Daniel laughed at something someone said, just a little louder than necessary. He had perfected that too. The performance, the presence, the illusion of effortlessness. What people didn't see was the version of him from years ago, before the tailored suits, before the donors, before the name meant anything, back when the company was just an idea, and long nights, and risk that felt like standing on the edge of something you couldn't control. I shifted my weight slightly, heels sinking just enough into the carpet to remind me I was still here, still standing, still watching. A waiter brushed past me and murmured an apology. I nodded. Invisible interactions. Those had become familiar. Is that his wife? Someone else whispered behind me. Yes, came the reply. She's quiet. Quiet. Another polite word. It meant unnecessary. I didn't turn around. Didn't correct them. Because correction requires investment. And I had stopped investing a long time ago. The music shifted slightly. Something softer, signaling the next phase of the evening. Speeches would start soon. Daniel would take the stage, tell the story again, his version, the one people believed. A subtle change moved through the room, not loud, but undeniable. Conversations paused, postures adjusted, attention shifted toward the entrance. I followed the movement with my eyes, and then I saw him. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. Tall, older, controlled. The kind of man who didn't fill a room. He recalibrated it. Daniel saw him at the same moment. I watched the shift happen in real time. The slight straightening of his shoulders, the quick adjustment of his jacket, the immediate calculation. Opportunity. Daniel always recognized it. He moved toward the man without hesitation, already smiling, already speaking, already selling. The billionaire listened, but not fully. His gaze moved, slowly, deliberately, across the room, until it landed on me. Not curious, not impressed, recognizing. That was the difference. I held his gaze, just for a second, maybe two, long enough to confirm what I thought I saw. Then I looked away and took another sip of champagne. The room didn't change after he said it. That was the first thing I noticed. No one gasped. No one turned. No one reacted the way people do in movies when something cruel is said out loud. Because in rooms like this, cruelty is quieter. It blends in. I stood where he left me. Same spot, same glass in my hand, same small, practiced smile resting on my face like it belonged there. A group shifted closer beside me. 3 women, all in structured dresses and careful confidence. The kind of women who knew exactly how they were being perceived at all times. One of them glanced at me briefly, not long enough to be rude, just long enough to assess. Then she leaned in toward the others. "Daniel's numbers this quarter were insane," she said. "Of course they were," another replied. "He's brilliant." A pause. Then softer. "I heard his wife doesn't really get involved." A small laugh followed. Not loud, not cruel, just dismissive. I took a sip of champagne. Still cold, still sharp, still honest. They weren't wrong. Not in the way they understood it. Across the room, Daniel had already expanded his circle. 2 more men had joined him, one older, one younger, both leaning in slightly, the way people do when they're trying to stay inside the radius of someone they consider important. I watched his hands as he spoke. Open gestures, controlled movements. He knew exactly when to pause, when to smile, when to let silence do the work for him. He had learned well. "Claire?" The voice came from my right. I turned. It was Martin Hale, one of the board advisors. Mid-60s. Careful eyes. The kind of man who never said more than he needed to. "You're looking well," he said. "Thank you, Martin." He nodded once, then glanced toward Daniel. Big night for him. For him. I followed his gaze. "Yes," I said. Martin studied me for a second longer than necessary. Not intrusive, just aware. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Enjoy the evening," he added. And just like that, he stepped away. No questions, no assumptions, just distance. I exhaled slowly. Not relief, just recognition. Even the ones who knew something chose not to say it. A server passed again. I set my empty glass down on the tray and took another. Fresh glass, same taste. A man brushed past me, apologizing without looking. His shoulder clipped mine lightly. Not enough to hurt, just enough to remind me how easy it was to be overlooked. "I'm so sorry," he said quickly, already moving on. "It's fine," I replied. He didn't hear it. He wasn't meant to. The music softened again, shifting into something slower, more deliberate. Conversations adjusted with it, lower, closer, more private. This was the part of the night where deals started forming, not on paper, but in tone, in proximity, in who stood next to whom, and who didn't. I moved slightly toward the edge of the room, not hiding, just repositioning. From there, I could see everything. Daniel was laughing again, one hand on someone's shoulder, the other holding his glass just high enough to signal confidence without arrogance. "I've always believed," I heard him say, "that if you're willing to take the risk, the rest follows." The others nodded. Of course they did. Risk, that word again. I let it sit. Years ago, risk had meant something different. It had meant late nights at the kitchen table, numbers spread across pages, conversations that didn't end when they got uncomfortable. It had meant choosing uncertainty, on purpose. Now, it was just a story, a polished version, easier to sell. A woman approached Daniel then, mid-30s, sharp posture, sharper smile. She touched his arm lightly when she spoke, too familiar for business, too calculated for coincidence. Daniel didn't pull away. He leaned in slightly, adjusted his tone. I watched the shift, again. Not new, just consistent. "They make a great pair," someone behind me murmured. I didn't turn this time. "Power attracts power," another voice replied. A pause, then, "And sometimes it upgrades." A quiet chuckle. I closed my eyes for half a second. Not long enough to be noticed, just long enough to file it away. When I opened them again, the room looked the same. Golden, polished, perfectly arranged, and completely indifferent. Near the entrance, movement again, subtle, but heavier this time. Staff straightening, conversation stalling mid-sentence. heads turning not out of curiosity, but awareness. He had moved further into the room, the billionaire. Daniel was already beside him now. Of course he was. I watched as Daniel spoke, animated, confident, slightly faster than before, selling something, always selling something. The older man listened, but not fully. There was a stillness to him that didn't match the rest of the room, a kind of restraint that made everything around him feel louder than it actually was. And then, just briefly, his gaze shifted, away from Daniel, across the crowd, over shoulders, past conversations, through the layers of performance, until it found me again. This time, it lingered. Not by accident, not by curiosity, deliberately. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge him in any way that would invite attention, but I didn't look away either. The space between us held for a moment. Then someone stepped in front of him, breaking the line. The room resumed. Noise returned. Movement reset. But something had changed. Not out there. In here. I set my glass down, untouched this time. Across the room, Daniel raised his slightly, signaling the beginning of something. A speech. Of course. He stepped toward the stage, confident, certain, unquestioned. The room began to quiet. People turning, adjusting, preparing to listen. I stayed where I was, watching, waiting, because I had heard that speech before, just not like this, and something told me, tonight, it wouldn't end the same way. Daniel didn't look at me again before he stepped onto the stage. That was the second thing I noticed. Not the applause, not the way the room leaned toward him, not even the shift in lighting as the spotlight settled across his shoulders. Just that. He didn't check if I was watching. Because he already knew. I always was. "Good evening," he began, voice smooth, measured. "Thank you all for being here tonight." The room quieted immediately. Not completely. There are always small sounds. Glass against glass. Fabric shifting. Someone clearing their throat too late. That attention. That was his now. I stayed where I was, near the edge, close enough to hear, far enough not to be seen. That had become instinct. "I see a lot of familiar faces tonight," Daniel continued, scanning the room with practiced ease. Partners, friends, people who believed in what we're building. What we're building. Again. The phrasing hadn't changed, only the ownership behind it. He paused just long enough for the room to settle into him. Then, "I started this company with a simple idea." I almost smiled, not because it was amusing, because it was precise, carefully chosen words. I started, not we. Not anymore. The audience nodded along. Of course they did. It was a clean narrative. One man, one vision, one success story. Easier to admire, easier to repeat. From where I stood, I could see the billionaire again, closer now, not in the center, not trying to be. He stood slightly off to the side, hands loosely folded, posture unchanged. Still, watching. But not Daniel, not entirely. There was a difference in the way he listened. He wasn't absorbing the story. He was measuring it. Daniel continued, moving into the part he knew would land. "The early days weren't easy," he said, letting a small, controlled laugh slip into his voice. "Long nights, hard decisions, risk. Risk. That word again. It sounded different coming from the stage. Cleaner, lighter, stripped of what it had actually cost. I shifted slightly, adjusting my stance. Not discomfort, just grounding. There had been nights when risk meant deciding which bill could wait, conversations that stretched until sunrise, silences that said more than the words ever could. But those details didn't translate well in rooms like this. They complicated the story, and Daniel preferred simple. I watched his hands again. Same gestures, same timing. But something was off. Subtle, almost invisible. His eyes moved more tonight, not scanning the room for connection, for approval, for validation. They kept returning, briefly, quickly, to the man near the side, the billionaire. It wasn't obvious, not to anyone who wasn't looking for it, but I was. Daniel adjusted his jacket mid-sentence. A small movement, unnecessary. His voice lifted slightly at the end of a line that didn't need emphasis. He laughed once, half a second too early. Tiny things, but they stacked. He wasn't just speaking, he was performing. For one person. And tonight, Daniel said, raising his glass slightly, we celebrate what's possible when vision meets execution. Applause followed, right on cue. He smiled into it, accepted it, owned it. Across the room, a man near me leaned toward his companion. He's good, he murmured. He knows how to sell it, the other replied. Sell. That was the right word. Not build. Not create. Sell. I didn't move, didn't react. Just let the word sit where it belonged. On stage, Daniel stepped slightly to the side, gesturing toward a screen behind him. Numbers appeared. Growth curves. Clean. Impressive. Curated. This year alone, he continued, we've expanded into 3 new markets. The details blurred, not because they weren't accurate, because they weren't complete. Near the edge of the stage, someone from the event team adjusted a microphone stand. Too close. Daniel shifted again. Another small movement. His focus broke for a fraction of a second, then returned. Controlled. Recentered. I glanced back toward the billionaire. He hadn't moved, but his head tilted slightly now. Not admiration. Assessment. As if he were listening for something beneath the words, or noticing what wasn't being said. A server passed between us, momentarily blocking my view. When the space cleared again, his gaze had shifted. Not to Daniel, to the screen. Then, slowly, back across the room. It stopped just short of me, then moved again. Not lingering this time, but not dismissing either. Cataloging. That was the word. He was cataloging the room. People, positions, patterns. And Daniel was just one part of it. On stage, the speech moved toward its peak. I've always believed, Daniel said, voice lowering slightly, drawing the room in, that success isn't about where you start. A pause. Perfectly placed. It's about how far you're willing to go. Applause again. Stronger this time. People like endings that sound complete, even when they're not. Daniel smiled, stepping back half a pace, accepting a moment, owning it. For a second, the room belonged entirely to him. Then, a slight shift. Not loud, not abrupt, but enough. The billionaire moved, just one step forward, not toward the stage, into the light. Small, but visible. Daniel noticed. Of course he did. His posture tightened, just slightly. The smile stayed, but something behind it adjusted, calculated. He lowered his glass, waited, just a fraction longer than necessary, as if anticipating something. Or someone. The room hadn't fully settled yet. Applause was still tapering, but attention began to redirect. Not completely, just enough to feel it. Daniel's eyes flicked once more toward the man, then back to the audience. Then, again. That was new. He didn't usually repeat himself like that. I watched him hold the moment, stretch it, control it, but not completely. Not tonight. Because for the first time, he wasn't the only one shaping the room. I straightened slightly, not in anticipation, in recognition. Something was shifting, not on the stage, under it. And Daniel could feel it, even if he didn't understand it yet. He cleared his throat lightly, prepared to continue, to move forward, to regain full control. But before he could, a voice, calm and even, cut cleanly through the space. Interesting. Not loud, not forceful, but undeniable. The room stilled, not instantly, but completely. And Daniel didn't speak. Not yet. The word hung in the air longer than it should have. Interesting. It didn't echo. It didn't demand attention, but it took it anyway. Daniel's hand tightened slightly around the stem of his glass, not enough for anyone to notice, except me. I had spent years noticing the things no one else did. The room didn't move yet. People held their positions, waiting, because instinct told them something had shifted, even if they didn't know what. I didn't look at the stage. Not immediately. Instead, I let my eyes drop, just slightly, to my hands. Empty now. No glass. No movement. Still. There was a time when they were never still. Not in the beginning. Back then, everything moved. Too fast. Too uncertain. Too close to failure to ever feel stable. We didn't have a ballroom. We had a kitchen table. Wood scratched from years of use. One uneven leg Amul never fixed. I remember pressing my palm flat against it late one night, feeling the slight tilt as I shifted my weight. Numbers were spread out in front of us, not printed. Handwritten. Columns. Margins. Adjustments scribbled in the corners where space ran out. Daniel was pacing. He used to do that. Back and forth. Back and forth. Talking while he moved, like if he stopped, the idea would disappear. We just need one break, he said. Not to me. To the room. To himself. I didn't respond. Not right away. Instead, I crossed out a number. Rewrote it. Adjusted the column beneath it. Then I slid the paper toward him. We don't need a break, I said. He stopped pacing. Looked down. Frowned slightly. What do you mean? I topped the page. If we shift the pricing model here. A pause. We can survive 6 months without outside capital. He didn't sit. He leaned. Close enough to read. Far enough to keep distance from the reality of it. That's tight, I replied. A difference he didn't fully understand yet. We stayed there until morning. Not arguing. Refining. Every number had a consequence. Every decision had weight. There was no room for performance. Only function. Later, when the first investor meeting came, Daniel wore his only suit. Dark, slightly too big at the shoulders. He stood in front of them, confident, articulate, selling the idea like it already existed. I sat beside him, not speaking, just listening, watching their reactions. One of them asked about burn rate. Daniel answered, smooth, convincing, incomplete. I leaned forward, just enough. 42% of projected revenue is already secured through pre-commitments, I said. The room shifted. Subtly. One of the investors looked at me instead of him. From where? He asked. I named them. One by one. Not large companies, but stable ones. Enough. Daniel glanced at me. Quick. Surprised. Then he smiled. As if it had always been part of the plan. We got the meeting after that. Not the investment. The meeting. Which was enough. It always was. Small steps. Measured progress. No wasted movement. There were nights we didn't talk at all. Just worked. Screens glowing in the dark. Coffee going cold beside us. Once, around 3 a.m, Daniel said, "You're good at this." I didn't look up. I know. He laughed. Back then, it wasn't arrogance. Just fact. We built it like that. Piece by piece. Quietly. No announcements. No audience. Just decisions. And consequences. The first contract came through on a Tuesday. I remember because the email arrived at 9:17 a.m. Daniel called me from the other room. We got it. I walked in, looked at the screen, read it once, then again. Terms, conditions, numbers. All correct. I nodded. Okay, I said. He stared at me. That's it? I turned back toward the kitchen. We have work to do. Celebration came later. If it came at all. There wasn't time for it then. There was never time for it then. The company grew. Not fast. Not clean. But steadily. Each step calculated. Each risk. Chosen. Not taken. Chosen. At some point, the narrative began to shift. Not in the work. In the telling of it. Daniel started saying I more often. At first, it was small. In meetings. In introductions. I started this. I built this. I didn't correct him. Not immediately. Because technically, he wasn't wrong. Just not complete. And incomplete stories are easier to repeat. Easier to sell. Easier to remember. There was a dinner. Early on. Not like this. Smaller. Quieter. Important enough. Daniel sat at the head of the table. I sat beside him. Someone asked about leadership structure. He answered. Confident. Direct. They report to me, he said. A pause. Then? And Claire? He hesitated. Not long. Just enough. She prefers to stay behind the scenes. I looked at him. He didn't look back. The table moved on. Conversation shifted. No one questioned it. Why would they? It fit. Clean. Simple. Comfortable. After that, it happened more often. Introduction shortened. Details removed. My name? Used less. Then, eventually, not at all. I adjusted. Not outwardly. Internally. Less speaking. More observing. More letting things unfold exactly as they were being presented. Because correction requires friction. And friction slows things down. Daniel didn't want slow. He wanted expansion. Scale. Recognition. Things that moved faster than accuracy.
There was a point where paperwork changed, titles adjusted, structures formalized. He asked me to review it. I did. Every line, every clause. There was a section. Ownership. I paused there. Read it twice. Then once more. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching. It simplifies things, he said. I nodded slowly. Simplification. Another clean word. Another incomplete one. Is this what you want? I asked. He didn't hesitate. Yes. I signed. Not because I didn't understand. Because I did. Perfectly. Sometimes, stepping back isn't surrender. It's observation. From a better angle. From the stage, the light shifted slightly. Brighter now. Pulling me back. The room returned. The gala. The noise. The performance. Daniel was still standing there. Glass in hand. Smile controlled. But his posture had changed. Not much. Just enough. The billionaire hadn't moved again. But the space around him had. People were quieter near him. More careful. Daniel cleared his throat. Preparing to continue. To reassert. To move forward. But something in the room wasn't aligning the way it had before. I lifted my eyes fully to the stage now. Not watching Daniel. watching the distance between him and the truth he had been repeating for years. It had held until now, and something told me it was about to break.
The silence didn't last long. Rooms like this don't allow it. Someone laughed too quickly. Another voice picked up where Daniel had paused. A glass clinked, deliberate, controlled, an attempt to smooth the surface before anyone could notice the crack beneath it. Daniel recovered first. Of course he did. He smiled, adjusted his stance, lifted his chin just enough to reclaim the space. "Thank you," he said lightly, as if nothing had interrupted him. "Where was I?" A few polite chuckles followed. The room let him continue. But something had shifted. Not visibly, not completely, just enough. I felt it in the pauses, in the way people were now listening a fraction more carefully. Daniel continued speaking. Same rhythm, same structure, but tighter, more deliberate, as if he were aware, somewhere beneath the surface, that control had slipped, even if only for a moment. I stepped back, not away, just out of the direct line of attention, toward the side corridor near the bar. Quieter there, dimmer lighting, less performance, more space. A server passed. I didn't take anything this time. My hands stayed empty. That felt more accurate. "Claire." The voice came from behind me. Not loud, not questioning, certain. I turned. He was closer now. The billionaire. Up close, he looked exactly the way he had from across the room. Composed. Still. No unnecessary movement. The kind of presence that didn't ask for space. It rearranged it. "Mr. Carter," I said. He watched me for a second. Not surprised. Just confirming. "You remember me?" he said. "I remember numbers," I replied. A faint shift at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. "Most people remember my name. I remember the terms you didn't agree to." That did it. A small pause. Measured. Then, 17% equity dilution, he said. "You argued for 12. 10. I corrected. Another pause. Longer this time. Not uncomfortable. Precise. "You walked out. So did you." His gaze held mine. Steady. Unblinking. "Most people wouldn't have," he said. "They weren't reading the same contract." Silence. Not empty. Full. He shifted slightly, just enough to angle himself so the rest of the room disappeared behind him. A private space. Created without effort. "You built the early structure," he said. Not a question. A statement. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. He already knew. "I thought so," he added. A server approached. Hesitated. Then redirected. Even staff adjusted around him. "Why are you standing over here?" he asked. I glanced toward the ballroom. Daniel's voice carried. Steady again. Confident. Filling the space he believed was entirely his. "Better view," I said. "Of what?" I took a second. Not to think. To choose. Patterns. He followed my gaze. Watched Daniel. Listened. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, "He's good," Carter said. "Yes. He's careful. Now." That caught his attention. A slight tilt of his head. "Now?" he repeated. He learned. From me. I didn't say it. I didn't need to. Carter exhaled slowly. Not impatience. Recognition. "And you?" he asked. I looked at him. Still learning. Another almost smile. Brief. Controlled. "You're not on the board," he said. "No." "You're not listed in the filings." "No." "And yet?" He let the sentence hang, unfinished, because he didn't need to finish it. I held his gaze. Didn't fill the space for him. That wasn't my role. Not anymore. "Why are you letting him speak for you?" There it was. Direct. Clean. no decoration. The kind of question that doesn't sound aggressive, but leaves no room to hide. I didn't answer immediately. I turned my head slightly, just enough to look back into the room. Daniel was nearing the end of his speech, his voice steady, confident, certain. The audience was with him again, or close enough. I let the silence stretch. Not to avoid the question, to let it settle where it belonged. Then, "I'm not letting him," I said. Carter watched me, waited. I didn't continue. Because explanations dilute things, and I had learned not everything needs to be explained to be understood. "That's not how it looks," he said. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." Another pause. This one sharper. "You walked away," he said. "Did I?" His eyes narrowed slightly. Not suspicion. Focus. "Ownership doesn't disappear," he said. "Neither does perception." We stood there, the noise of the gala folding in around us without touching us. Two separate conversations happening at once. One loud, one real. "You signed the restructuring," he said. Again. Not a question. "You read it," I replied. "I read everything." "I know." A beat. Then. "And you signed anyway?" "Yes." "Why?" I met his gaze fully this time. No deflection. No distance. "Because timing matters." Silence. He studied that. Turned it over. Measured it. Across the room, applause began again. Daniel had finished. Or thought he had. Carter didn't look. Not yet. "You're still here," he said. "Yes." "That's not passive." "No." Another small shift in his expression. Understanding this time. Not complete, but enough. "You're waiting," he said. I didn't respond. Didn't confirm. Didn't deny. Because naming something sometimes weakens it. And this didn't need to be weaker. From the stage, Daniel stepped back, accepting the applause. Owning it. Still. Carter finally turned his head. Watched him. Not impressed. Not dismissive. Just evaluating. Then he looked back at me. "One thing," he said. I waited. When the room turns. A pause. Slight. Deliberate. "Don't hesitate." I held his gaze. Didn't nod. Didn't agree. But I didn't look away either. Because hesitation had never been the problem. Across the room, Daniel raised his glass again, preparing to transition, to continue, to keep control. But the room wasn't entirely his anymore. And for the first time that night, neither was the story. Carter stepped back. Just enough to break the space, but not the moment. "Let's see how he finishes this," he said quietly. I turned my eyes back to the stage. Daniel opened his mouth to speak again. And this time, I didn't watch him. I watched everyone else. Daniel didn't pause after the applause. That was deliberate. He stepped forward again before the room could settle too comfortably, before conversations could restart, before attention could drift. Control isn't just about what you say. It's about when you don't give people space to think. "Before we move into the next segment," he said, voice steady, confident, "I want to take a moment to talk about where we're going. Not where we've been, where we're going. Forward always sounds better." The lights adjusted slightly, subtle but intentional. The screen behind him shifted to a darker tone. Cleaner slides, sharper numbers. Projection, scale, future. I stayed where I was, near the edge, unmoved. Carter hadn't left, not fully. He stepped just far enough to blend back into the room, but not far enough to disappear from it. I could feel his attention without looking. Daniel began walking slowly across the stage. Measured steps. Not pacing. Positioning. We've reached a point, he continued, where growth is no longer about survival. A small pause. It's about dominance. The word landed. Heavy. Intentional. A few heads nodded. Others leaned in. Dominance was a word people liked hearing when it wasn't directed at them. I watched the room instead of him. That had become more useful. There were shifts. Subtle ones. A man near the front adjusted his stance, arms crossing, not defensive, but reconsidering. A woman beside him tilted her head slightly, eyes narrowing. Not disagreement, just recalibration. Daniel kept going. Didn't see it. Or chose not to. We're not just expanding into markets, he said. We're defining them. Another pause. Longer this time. He was building something. Not a company. An image. He lifted his glass slightly. Not a toast. A signal. I've spent years making sure every detail is controlled. There it was again. Clean. Direct. Unshared. I let that sit. Across the room, someone whispered, "He's intense." Another replied, "That's why it works." Works. That word again. Different from truth. Closer to outcome. Daniel shifted his weight, turning slightly toward the right side of the room. Toward the cluster where Garger stood. Not directly. Never directly. But close enough. "I don't believe in leaving things to chance," he continued. "Every move we've made has been intentional." Intentional. Another clean word. Another incomplete one. My fingers rested lightly against the side of my dress. Still. No movement. There was a time when I would have stepped in. Not publicly. Never that. But earlier. Behind closed doors. In conversations that didn't need witnesses. Corrections made before they became statements. Adjustments made before they became identity. That time had passed.
Not suddenly. Gradually. Like everything else. Daniel continued. Now faster. Momentum building. Next quarter, we'll be launching initiatives that will position us ahead of every competitor in this space. Applause started again. Too early. He didn't stop it. He leaned into it. Smiled. Accepted. Owned. The screen behind him shifted again. Graphs rising. Projections extending. Numbers that looked inevitable when presented correctly. Certainty is easy to sell, especially when it's framed as already decided. I watched his shoulders. They had changed. Not physically. In the way he held them. Higher. Tighter. More fixed. Confidence had edged into something else. Less flexible. Less aware. Across the room, Carter hadn't moved. But the people around him had. Slightly. Space had opened without anyone acknowledging it. Not avoidance. Adjustment. They were giving him room. Even without being asked. Daniel's eyes flicked toward that space again. Quick. Then back to the room. Then again. There it was. Not insecurity. Not yet. But awareness.
And tonight, Daniel said, voice lowering slightly, pulling the room back in, we're opening the door to something bigger. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, closer to the audience, closer to control. I didn't get here by waiting for permission. A small laugh followed. Practiced. Expected. And I'm not about to start now. The room responded. Not loudly, but enough. Approval doesn't always sound like applause. Sometimes it's just absence of resistance. I didn't move, didn't react, just watched. Because there's a point, right before something shifts, where everything looks stable, even when it isn't. Daniel lifted his glass again, this time higher, more definitive. A future built on precision, he said. A pause, then on control. The word stayed in the air longer than the others. He held it there, let it settle, owned it. Across the room, Carter finally moved again. Just a step. Not forward, not back, sideways, repositioning. His gaze lifted, not to the screen, not to the crowd, to Daniel, direct, uninterrupted. Daniel saw it. Of course he did. His hand tightened slightly around the glass. His smile held, but something underneath it shifted. Barely, but enough. I felt it. The room didn't change. Not yet. The lights were the same. The music hadn't returned. The audience was still watching, still listening, still inside the version of the story Daniel had built. But underneath, something was misaligned. Not broken, not exposed, just out of place. And Daniel, for the first time that night, wasn't adjusting fast enough. I straightened slightly, not in reaction, in readiness. Because sometimes, the moment doesn't announce itself. It just arrives. Daniel opened his mouth again, ready to continue, to push forward, to keep control. But this time, he wasn't the only one deciding what came next. Daniel didn't slow down. If anything, he accelerated. That was the third thing I noticed. He didn't give the room time to question the shift, didn't leave space for the interruption to settle into meaning. He moved straight through it. Where we're going, he continued, voice sharper now, more defined, isn't just growth. He stepped forward again, closer to the edge, closer to the people who mattered. It's leadership. The word landed cleaner this time, less polished, more asserted. A few heads nodded, some leaned forward. Others stayed still, but listening more carefully now. Daniel lifted his chin slightly, adjusted his stance, reclaims the rhythm. I didn't get here by following what others were doing, he said. I got here by building something no one else saw coming. There it was, the shift, subtle but irreversible, from we to I, fully, cleanly, without hesitation. The screen behind him faded to black. No numbers now, no projections, just him, center, alone, controlled. I built this company from nothing. Silence, a fraction of a second. Then, applause. Stronger this time, cleaner, certain. Because that was the version people understood, the version they came here for. A man near the front stood first, not completely, just enough to signal approval. Others followed, not standing, but clapping harder, longer.
Admiration doesn't always need confirmation. It just needs a clear story. And Daniel was giving them one. I didn't move, didn't react, just watched, because timing matters. And this was the peak. Daniel knew it. I could see it in the way he held the moment. Didn't rush, didn't speak over the applause. He let it build, let it surround him, let it confirm everything he had just claimed. His eyes moved across the room, taking it in, owning it, absorbing it. And then they stopped. Not on the front row, not on the center. On the side, where Carter stood. The applause continued, but thinner now, because attention had shifted. Not completely, but enough. Carter hadn't clapped. Not once. He stood exactly as he had before, still. Hands relaxed, expression unchanged. Watching. Not impressed, not dismissive, just present. Daniel saw it. Of course he did. His smile held, but tighter now, less fluid. His fingers adjusted slightly on the glass, grip recalibrated. He stepped back half a pace. Not retreat, reset. And tonight, Daniel said, voice returning, we open the next chapter. Applause faded. The room leaned in again. He was trying to move forward, to keep control, to transition. But the timing was off, because the room wasn't entirely with him anymore, not the way it had been. Carter moved, just one step, forward, into the open. No announcement, no signal. But space made room for him anyway, automatically, naturally. People shifted, not consciously, just enough. Daniel's eyes flicked again, locked, just for a second, then back to the room. He tried to continue. We're looking at partnerships that will redefine. Interesting. The same word. This time, clearer, closer. Not thrown across the room, placed inside it, directly. The sound didn't rise. It didn't need to, because the room adjusted around it instantly. Applause stopped, completely. Not gradually, not awkwardly, just gone. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels watched. Daniel didn't speak. Not immediately. His mouth had already formed the next word, but it didn't come out. Because now, he wasn't controlling the timing anymore. Carter took another step. Not toward the stage, but into alignment with it. Visible. Unavoidable. Would you mind? He said calmly, clarifying that. No edge, no accusation, just precision. Daniel blinked once. Small, fast. What exactly? He asked. His voice held, but thinner now, less anchored. Carter tilted his head slightly, not confused, focused. You said, he continued, you built this company from nothing. A pause. Measured. Intentional. I'm curious what you mean by that. The room didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't shift. Because everyone understood this wasn't a question. It was a line. And Daniel was standing on the wrong side of it. He straightened, lifted his glass slightly again. Reassertion. I mean exactly what I said, he replied. Every step of this company. He stopped. Not because he wanted to, because something in the room didn't support the sentence anymore. Carter didn't interrupt, didn't push, just waited. And waiting, in a room like this, is pressure. Daniel's eyes moved again, quick, across the room, searching, not for answers, for alignment, for something to hold on to. They passed over faces that had been certain minutes ago. Now, less so. Then, for a fraction of a second, they landed on me. Not long, just enough. Then away. Because even now, he wasn't ready to include me. Carter followed that movement. Not the glance, the direction. And for the first time,
His gaze didn't pass over me. It stopped. Direct. Unmistakable. Then he looked back at Daniel and spoke. Calm. Even. Final. You might want to correct that. The sentence didn't land immediately. It didn't need to. You might want to correct that.
Daniel didn't move, not right away. The room held, waiting, because something in Carter's tone had shifted the structure of the moment. Not louder, not sharper, just final. Daniel let out a small breath, controlled, measured. I'm not sure what you're implying, he said. Careful, neutral, buying time. Carter didn't respond immediately. He didn't look at Daniel. Instead, he looked at me. Direct, uninterrupted. Then he spoke. She owns half of this company. No emphasis, no performance, just fact. The room didn't react, not at first, because statements like that don't register as sound. They register as impact. Silence moved through the space, not outward, inward, like something collapsing without noise. Daniel blinked, once, then again, small, uncontrolled. What? He said. It came out too fast, too thin. Carter didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. He stepped slightly to the side, just enough, clearing the line between Daniel and me. The room followed, eyes shifting, one by one, not rushing, not dramatic, just redirecting. A woman near the front lowered her glass, didn't drink. A man beside her leaned forward, not speaking, just recalculating. Daniel laughed, short, sharp. Incorrect. That's not, he started, stopped, started again. That's not accurate. His voice tried to settle, didn't. Carter's gaze didn't move. Check your original filings, he said, calm, even. You'll find her name before yours. A pause, longer this time, because now people were remembering, not facts, fragments, conversations, meetings, names they had heard and then stopped hearing. Daniel's hand tightened around the glass, too tight. The stem shifted, a small crack, barely audible, but enough. He set it down, quickly, too quickly. I think there's been a misunderstanding, he said. Now, faster, less controlled. I built this. No, Carter said, not louder, just placed over the sentence, like it didn't belong. The room held again, tighter. Daniel stopped, mid-word, because interruption like that doesn't invite continuation. It ends it. Carter took one step forward, not toward Daniel, toward the truth. You scaled it, he said. You sold it well. A pause. Then, but you didn't build it. Silence. Not empty. Heavy. Final. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't step forward. Because movement would have made it a reaction. And this wasn't a reaction. It was alignment. Daniel's eyes moved again, searching, landing on faces that no longer reflected him the same way. Approval had shifted, subtly, but completely. A man in the second row leaned back. Distance. A woman near the bar turned her body slightly. Reorientation. No one spoke, because no one knew which version of the room they were standing in anymore. Daniel finally looked at me, fully. Not a glance, not avoidance, direct. For the first time that night. What is this? He asked. Not to Carter, to me. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. There was something else in it now. Not anger, not yet. Disorientation. I held his gaze. Didn't soften, didn't sharpen, just steady. Correcting the narrative, I said. Silence. He searched my face. For explanation, for hesitation,
for something that would make this reversible. There wasn't anything there, because reversals require time, and time had already passed. Carter shifted slightly, not breaking the moment, just anchoring it. She structured your first 3 contracts, he said, to keep you solvent. Daniel didn't react, not visibly, but something in his face stopped. She negotiated your initial capital, Carter continued, on terms you couldn't have secured. Each sentence, placed, measured, irreversible. The room listened, not to the words, to the pattern. Daniel's mouth opened, closed. He looked back at me, then away, then back again, trying to place something that had always been there, but never fully seen. That's not, he started again, stopped, because denial requires certainty, and certainty was gone. I shifted my weight, slightly, not stepping forward, not stepping back, just standing differently, more aligned, more visible. Nothing else changed, not the lighting, not the room, just position. Carter's voice lowered, not softer, closer. You didn't lose anything tonight, he said, to Daniel. A pause. Then, you just stopped controlling what people believe. The sentence settled, clean. Daniel didn't respond, couldn't, because there was nothing left to adjust, no angle to recover, no version to pivot into, only what was and what had always been. The silence stretched, not awkward, not fragile, resolved. I turned my head slightly, looked across the room, not at faces, at distance, at space, at how quickly it had rearranged. Then back to the stage. Daniel stood there, same position, same suit, same man, different context. That was all it took. I didn't speak, didn't need to, because the room had already heard everything it needed, and this time, no one was listening to him. No one moved first. That was the final thing I noticed. Not Daniel, not the board members, not the investors who had been leaning toward him just minutes ago. The room held, not in shock anymore, in recalibration. Daniel looked at me again, still searching, still trying to find something familiar in a situation that had already moved past him. Claire, he said. My name sounded different now, not softer, not warmer, just unfamiliar in his mouth. He stepped off the stage, too quickly. The movement broke whatever structure he had left. A few people shifted back instinctively, not dramatically, just enough. Distance. Claire, wait, he said. I didn't. I turned. Not away from him. Through the room. A straight line. Measured. Unhurried. The kind of movement that doesn't ask permission. It changes the space instead. People moved without thinking, not stepping aside for me, repositioning around something they had just begun to understand. A woman who had been watching me earlier lowered her gaze. Not avoidance. Adjustment. A man near the aisle stepped back half a pace. Not fear. Recognition. Behind me, Daniel's voice followed. Claire, this isn't how we handle this. Handle. I kept walking, because there was nothing left to handle, only something left to end.
Near the edge of the ballroom, a small table had been set up for post-event documentation. Formalities, donations, signatures. I stopped there. The event coordinator looked up, uncertain. Then, quickly, too quickly, straightened. Mrs. Whitmore, she said. That hadn't been the title before, not tonight. I nodded once, nothing more. She slid a folder toward me, already prepared. Of course it was. Everything in rooms like this is prepared, just not always for the right person. I opened it. Pages, clean, structured, terms I already knew, clauses I had written in earlier versions. They hadn't changed, only the names attached to them had. Daniel reached me then, breath slightly uneven, controlled, but not fully. Claire, he said again, lower this time. We should talk about this privately. Privately. I didn't look at him. I turned a page, read it once, no hesitation, picked up the pen. Claire. His voice tightened, this time not controlled. This is not the place. I signed. One clean motion. No pause. No adjustment. The ink settled into the paper like it had always been waiting for it. The coordinator exhaled softly. Didn't realize she had been holding her breath. I closed the folder. Handed it back. "Process it tonight," I said. She nodded immediately. Yes, of course. No questions, no delay. Daniel stepped closer. Too close. "Claire, you're making this look..." He stopped, because there wasn't a word for it. Not one he could use without admitting what it actually was. I finally turned to him, fully, for the first time since the stage. His expression had shifted. Not just surprise, not just confusion. Something deeper. Something he didn't recognize in himself yet. Loss. "What are you doing?" he asked. Not accusing, not commanding. Trying. I held his gaze. Didn't soften. Didn't sharpen. Just steady. "Correcting the narrative," I said. Silence. He searched my face. For explanation. For hesitation. For something that would make this reversible. There wasn't anything there. Because reversals require time. And time had already passed.
Behind him, the room had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. People were watching differently now. Not him, not me, the space between. A few had already turned away, not out of disinterest, out of conclusion. The story had ended. They were moving on. Daniel noticed. Of course he did. His shoulders dropped, just slightly, the first real movement of the night that wasn't controlled. "We built this together," he said. Past tense, unintentional, accurate. I didn't respond, because agreement would have softened it, and it didn't need to be softened. "You can't just," he started, stopped, because there wasn't a continuation that didn't expose something he wasn't ready to say out loud. I stepped past him, not brushing, not avoiding, just continuing. Carter stood near the exit, exactly where I expected him to be. He didn't speak, didn't nod, just acknowledged. That was enough. I reached the door. The noise of the ballroom stayed behind me, contained, distant, like it belonged to something finished. The night air was cooler, cleaner. No performance, no audience, just space. I took one step forward, then another. No hesitation. Behind me, through the glass, I could see movement again. Daniel speaking, people responding. But it didn't matter anymore, because for the first time, he wasn't the center of it. I didn't look back, didn't need to, because power doesn't ask to be seen. It just stops asking for permission, and I had already stopped.